Firefighters of Reddit, what's the dumbest person you had to save in a stupid situation? My dad was witness to someone being stupid and rescued by a firefighter. I posted this to the Tales from Tech Support subreddit a while ago. Here's a copy/paste point. My dad worked for IBM's AS/400, a mainframe system, tech support division for over 10 years, 1992 to 2003. A customer called in because he needed to run a report and send it out to the networked printer. For whatever reason, the report was failing to generate, and the guy on the phone was freaking out because some corporate bigwig demand that this report be printed and on his desk by 3 p.m. Just another day at work. About 10 minutes into the call, my dad starts to hear this strange high-pitched noise in the background. Dad, if you don't mind my asking, what's that noise at the background? Caller, oh, that's the fire alarm. Fire alarm, yeah, the building is on fire. Far be it from me to tell you what to do, but shouldn't you get out of there, Dan? You don't understand. I have to get this report printed. Now are you going to help me or not? So they continue to troubleshoot the issue. A few minutes after that, my dad hears shouting in the background. Dad, there seems to be a lot of yelling in the background. Is everything okay? Caller, yeah, it's fine. It's just the firefighters evacuating the building. Shouldn't you get out of there too, Dan? I absolutely have to get this report printed. Are you going to help me? I'm not sure that I should. We pay our support contract. I have to get this printed and you have to help me. It's almost 3 p.m. It's just a report. I don't think it's worth risking your life. The caller starts to get furious when the shouting in the background gets much louder. A firefighter has come over to the guy on the phone and starts barking orders at him to get out of the building. The caller tells the firefighter, look, I have to print this report before 3 p.m. and I can't leave until it's printed. Over the phone, Dad hears the firefighter scream, I don't give a damn about your goddamn report, the building is on fire. Now move. There's a scuffling noise and the phone handset on the other end drops to the ground as the firefighter physically drags the caller away. After that, all Dad could hear was the sound of the fire alarm and various crackling noises. Needless to say, the report did not get printed by 3 p.m. I was a volunteer firefighter many years back. One summer, after a long period of no rain, two good old boys decide to have a few dozen beers and take their Jeep into a nearby field to go off-roading. Well, 2 feet tall corn stalks that are bone dry wind up getting jammed up into the undercarriage, which, on a 90+ degree day, turns out to be hot enough to ignite a fire. The owner of the field sees the situation unfolding from their house and calls for fire and police. Given the proximity to my location, I go directly to the scene after hearing the page go out and see these two assholes trying to drive the Jeep faster and faster to put the fire out. Eventually, the engine gives out, but they won't leave the car. I physically had to reach in, burning my arms in the process, since I didn't respond to the station first to get my turnout gear and pull them out. Somehow, they decided that remaining in the car would slow down the flames. And because they thought it was a good idea to continue driving a burning vehicle around a dry field, we now have a significant brush fire and have to call mutual aid from another county to help douse the fire. State police get involved. I have a nice trip to the hospital, and assholes lose their Jeep and the remainder of their booze. Two I can recall. One specific. The specific one was a young girl around teenage years who decided those toddler swings with the seat you stick their legs through like a little basket so they can't fall out was made for a teenage girl. She got stuck and lost blood flow to her legs. We had to cut her down and get her to a hospital to have it safely removed due to it basically becoming a tourniquet on both her legs. The other is general, but it's people who didn't wear a seatbelt and the people they killed as a result. You have less control of a vehicle when you're not being held in place, so those wrecks are more common as the first sign of trouble. Your butt moves in the seat and reduces your ability to control the vehicle. You also become a projectile. If you're lucky, you only kill yourself. If you're not, you wind up bouncing around and killing a passenger. Also the leading cause of partial ejections and re-entry to vehicles, since nothing was holding them to the seats. So many times I could have just been there cutting someone out of a seat and them being barely beat up, but instead they had been scalped and died or hit their kid or spouse or other family member or friend and killed them. One in particular I remember was a large man not wearing a seat belt in an overturned truck. He woke up while we were working on him cutting the passenger side up to get down to him as the vehicle was on its side, driver side down. He kept asking us how his son was. At first we didn't get it. Then we realized he was laying on his 15 to 16-year-old son, and due to the man's size we didn't see him. The son was wearing a seatbelt, but he died because his father smashed into him and smothered him to death while we worked, rather than just wear a seatbelt extender so his seatbelt fit. Point also, don't lie to us about if you wore it. Your seatbelt won't fire the pretensioners if they are not engaged in the slot. They are designed that way. There is a circuit that is completed by the best being clicked in place, which is also how your car knows your passengers are wearing a seatbelt or not and sets off that obnoxious alarm. There is also a sensor in the passenger front seat of most modern vehicles to detect the weight of a small person, which is why your sodas or pizzas, it whatever, set off the alarm. Just wear the damn seatbelt and don't lie. If you were wearing it, I won't be able to pull tons of slack on it when I arrive. Guess what goes in the report as the determining factor your insurance sees as to if you should have your medical covered as a result of an accident? Yup. I don't know what they do with their information, but I have to write it in the report. Point source: State Vehicle Rescue Technician and Firefighter, mostly volunteer at this point. This is my dad's story, not mine, but I've heard it so many times I think I can accurately tell it here. Point: my dad was on the Boston Fire Department for a little over 35 years. For 13 of those years, he worked at a fire station in Dorchester. In Dorchester, there is a zoo, the Franklin Park Zoo. One morning in late September, they get a call to the Franklin Park Zoo for a young girl mauled by a gorilla. Point: this is the sort of call they'd get all the time. Gorilla jumps at the glass, kid gets scared, parents panic and call 911. So they hop in the truck and ride on over. It's one of those kinda foggy early fall mornings as they walk into the zoo. A couple of the other firefighters start walking into the zoo as my dad notices a man sitting on a bench holding a little girl in his arms. Assuming this is what the call is for, he walks over to the man. The little girl has a scrape on her forehead and she's crying, but is otherwise fine. The man looks like he just saw a ghost. So my dad asks the guy what's going on. The man just says little Joe is out. My dad says what does that mean? The man just repeats little Joe is out. So my dad says who the fuck is little Joe? Little Joe is a 500-pound adolescent male silverback gorilla loose in the streets of Boston. It's right about now that my dad realizes that he's not exactly qualified to handle a gorilla, but he doesn't know who to call. So he calls everyone. 2 minutes later the fire chief shows up, not knowing what the call was about yet, and jumps out of his car saying, Mark, is this about a faking gorilla? My dad says yeah, but how'd you hear that? The chief says he's standing at the bus stop on 7th Street. Now the SWAT team shows up, hats on backwards, M16s in hand, and my dad, being the smartest he is, looks at the sergeant and says, hey, I don't think this thing is armed. He caught a bit of flack for that later on animal control, and the SWAT team worked together to take down little Joe. It took 14 tranquilizer darts before he finally went unconscious. Little Joe is still alive and well at the Franklin Park Zoo. And here's a picture of him at the bus stop for those of you who don't believe me. I was a Navy corpsman, so this one is probably a bit of a reach, but whatevs. Marine comes to sick call with a seriously beaten up dick. Like, lacerations, bruising. Thing was really faked up. Point asked him what he did, and he insisted that what happened was that he had a surprise boner and it hit his zipped up pants zipper and basically went all garbage disposal on his junk. Dude would not drop this narrative, no matter how many times we told him that this just doesn't happen. Finally, Doc, the actual MD, comes in and tells him enough of this shit, yada yada, write him up for malingering. Need the full story. Point: dude jammed his wiener into the back of a computer tower. According to him, there was an opening back there, probably because old PC towers in the Navy routinely had sheets swapped out, and they didn't always cover openings when things were removed. So, because he was a faking donkey, he stuck his finger in it and felt a light tingling sensation as his skin made contact with something electrical. So he took the next logical step and whipped out his dick and shoved it into the back of this computer. What he did not account for was that the opening had sharp metal edges. But once inside, he got that tingling feeling, and so he felt like he might as well finish the job before he pulled out. Plus, and this is where I had to stop myself from laughing, he felt it was smarter to pull himself out flaccid rather than hard. Taps forehead. This was not a young man. This was not a man without rank. Point edit. I wear this gold and silver as badges of shame for the shit I've seen. I'm not the firefighter, but my brother's wife at the time there was this massive structure fire at a barn in town that drew out nearly every truck in the general area, like 3 towns worth of firefighters trying to get this thing under control. During all of this, there was some lady who continuously called 911 asking over and over again what's going on at the farm up the road. According to her, this woman would have to be a complete moron to not realize what was going on, as the fire could be seen for miles. Fast forward later into the night, and one of the ambulances on scene suddenly leaves. Obviously not normal for this sort of situation, but there isn't much time to question it. Fast forward still, and as things are finally starting to calm down and are under control, one of the volunteers on the original ambulance comes over in his own car and shuffles sheepishly over to her and the chief of their department. He tells them that there is a woman a little ways down the road who called the ambulance, hence why they left, and requires a lift assist, but absolutely refuses to let the EMTs do it. No, it has to be a firefighter. My brother's wife, seeing that the other departments have things under control, goes with the man to see what's up. Apparently, it was the same woman who had called 911 over and over again, and when they arrive, she is laying on the floor absolutely wailing. EMTs say they can't find anything wrong from what they've been able to do, but with a requested firefighter they are finally able to get this woman up. They start asking her what happened, hoping she might be more willing to share with my brother's wife there, and she says, "I was just feeling a little ignored. I figured this would get your attention." Grown woman just laid herself on the floor, called for help, insisted on a firefighter when there was no need, all because the barn fire was getting way more attention than she was, and the 911 operators wouldn't give her the gossip about what was going on. I know she got in major trouble for abusing 911. But from what I hear from the people on both fire and ambulance, she has made a habit of calling for help whenever she feels she's not getting enough attention. Get a call from a guy about cries for help coming from his neighbor's house. The neighbor called 911. We roll up lights and sirens, and sure enough, there's a lady calling for help out the upstairs bedroom window. I'm paraphrasing here. There was a bit more back and forth, especially about the condition of her husband. "Ma'am, we are with the fire department. Are you injured?" "No, it's my husband. He's unconscious. Please hurry." "Is he breathing?" "Yes, I think so. Can you let us in?" "No, just break down the door." So we break down the front door and rush upstairs to the master bedroom, only be greeted by the woman, naked, chain spread eagle to the bed with her husband out cold on the floor, wearing nothing but a Batman cape and mask. Evidently, during their kinky playtime, he had climbed up on a dresser and was going to jump onto the bed, but slipped in some lube and knocked himself out cold. She was secured tight to the bed and unable to free herself, and since this was mid-1980s, there was no way to ask Siri or Alexa to call for help. We loaded him up for a trip to the hospital and cut her loose so she could get dressed and join him. A fake. He made a full recovery. Obligatory not a firefighter, but I was working with them that day. So back in my harbor master days, the town would have a 4th of July fireworks display every year. They would bring in a barge with something like 2,000 big ol' mortars on it. We, along with the Coast Guard, State Environmental Police and a few local cops with boats, would set up a stay-back area around the barge for the show. Nothing serious ever happened, so we generally sat around with the best seats in the house. So we are all sitting there celebrating our independence by annihilating as much of the sky as the town budget would allow. About 2/3 of the way I notice a small fire on the front of the barge. So I give everyone a heads up on the radio. From a distance we see one of the crew run across this barge vomiting projectiles into the sky with a fire extinguisher in hand. About the same time as he arrives, the fire flares up big time. The guy just throws the fire extinguisher into said fire and starts running back to where apparently they had a protected area. Before he makes it back there is a massive flare-up/explosion. Everybody hits their lights and starts hauling us to get to the crew. That's when the remaining fireworks started going off. We were the second ones to arrive, and one of the assistant HMs is yelling at the crew to get off the barge. There are dozens of fireworks going off. You can feel an intense heat every single time. Balls of fire just flying every which way. The crew is refusing to leave. One guy is yelling at my coworker that they can't because all of their belongings were on the front of the barge where the fireworks were exploding in their tubes. The look on my guy's face was priceless. He just reaches up and starts pulling people down into his boat. I think by the time he grabbed the second guy they all got the message and started jumping in. We all haul ass out of there ASAP. Somehow the only injuries were minor from them jumping into the boat. Though I did hear that one of the Coast Guard boats won itself an ice hole in the roof. I never actually saw it. We then make a call to the tugboat that brought the barge to turn its water cannon on the thing. We got a big negatory from them on that one as they weren't going anywhere near the thing. The next option was the volunteer fire department. The problem was that they didn't have a fireboat, just trucks. So the possibly inebriated firemen need to commandeer the local 3-car ferry and use that to get their truck to the barge. It took them about 30 minutes to get there and foam the thing down. It was a pretty funny sight watching them trundle on by having a laugh about being on a ferry. We actually had to bring in the freaking bomb squad from the local large city, but they couldn't make it till the next day. When we finally got the report, the fire was caused by, you guessed it, all of the crew's belongings which were apparently sitting next to the mortars and not with them behind the barrier. The kicker was all of the company's insurance and licenses etc. were with their stuff, so they were all gone too. Just all round fun in small town America. I really like this question. Not a firefighter, but I took a few minutes to look through some related threads for relevant responses. Here are some of my favorites. My father was retired, a firefighter in London. He once phoned me just to tell me about a job he had just been to. He told me that he had just been to a fire in a such dungeon and that the fire had been started when the woman was trying to burn the man's chest hair off with a candle, then proceed to drop the candle onto the fur rug when hot wax burned her. I laughed and he said you'll be sick in a second. He then proceeded to tell me the couple were in their very late 70s. Rolled up to a 3-plex row of 2-story townhomes. The unit in the middle was blowing and going. By the time we put the fire out, there was a huge V pattern on the backside of the complex, meaning you could see where the fire started at about waist level near the rear wall, because everything above it was burned away upwards and outwards. Just completely cratered and gone in a V all the way up to the, now mostly missing, roof. Turns out the genius in the middle unit was trying to start his charcoal BBQ grill. Unfortunately, he didn't have any starter fluid, so he got the fantastic idea to use gasoline instead. Alas, the coals didn't completely catch the first time he lit them off, so he decided to pour on more gasoline out of the glass faking jar he was using to store it in. A spark in the coals leapt up the pouring gas into the jar. Said genius panicked and threw the jar directly at the wall of his townhome, where it exploded. Dipshit Molotov cocktailed his own home point when we rolled up our hoses and went back in service, leaving the scene in the capable hands of the investigators. The neighbors from either side were angrily and animatedly grouped up on the sidewalk out front, waiting for Captain Dummers to return from the walk he had suddenly decided he needed to go on to clear his head back. In 2011 there was a fire in Croatia, and I was sent out to stop it with a team. The cause of the fire was a cat. The cat turned on a stove. Don't ask me how. I was a volunteer with a rural department in the foothills of Appalachia, in a very small college town. Like, roughly 1500 students, and about 500 locals. Every year we had drunk students fall off the side of the relatively gentle sloping mountains around campus. These falls were rarely fatal or even likely to cause serious injury. One of the frats had a big formal, and we got the call that someone had wandered off from the party and couldn't be found. This is just before cell phones started to be everywhere, and cell phones didn't work very well around campus anyway. Turns out it is a guy in my class who I know pretty well. We go out in the woods looking for him and hear groaning down the side of one of the drop-offs. Not a far drop, about 15 feet, but sheer sides, and no way to walk out. I personally have climbed down this little gully before, and climbed back out. It is not difficult, but this guy can't get it together, and has no idea where he is. So we have to get the high-angle rescue truck, to drive out there with all our ropes and the backboard and other sheet. Then we have to get all rigged up, using the appropriate anchors and systems that we were required to use in any high-angle rescue situation. Then we have to drop down there and try to backboard this drunker's whole point the whole faking time he fought us on it. I'm sitting there trying to explain, hey man, it's me, your buddy, you know me, let me help you. Faking guy kept lurching away from us, taking swings and rolling off the board whenever we finally got him on it. It took half of the small undermanned fire department all goddamn night to get him out. Like, he literally had time to sober up enough to become cooperative. I suppose that's not much of a story, but it's funny, because I still give him shit about it to this day, whenever I see him. Just an incredibly frustrating, needlessly difficult situation. Not a firefighter, but former paramedic. Ironic that my best story for this is not one from in the field, but is from the point I was working a shift in a busy trauma center because I was an instructor for a paramedic program, and I had paramedic students doing clinical rotations through the year. A patient came in with a weight from a weight set stuck to his business. He had tried to have conjugal relations with the center of a weight that you would put on a barbell. I hope I'm using the right term, but probably not. The fit was such that arterial pressure allowed fluid to enter to the end of the business, but the lower pressure venous return meant that blood stayed trapped in the business, creating a business balloon and also a business that wasn't going to be separated from the weight anytime soon. I don't remember how heavy the weight was, I only remember it was big and red. Insert that's what he said joke here. So the guy shows up in the ER on his own, but before surgery is undertaken, the ER doc wanted to see if the fire depth could cut through the weight with some of its heavy rescue equipment used to cut people out of wrecked cars. So 911 was called. I don't know much about those weights, but I guess they are made of cement sometimes, and none of the hydraulic equipment the fire department tried could cut off the weight. One of my friends was on the crew that responded, and I got to hear all about it as we were all ushered out of the room during the actual cutting attempt. So attempts to cut fail, and we prep the guy for emergency surgery, I'm sure with a urologist, but it was over 20 years ago, so I don't remember for sure. I do know that the surgeon told the ER doc that the man would probably be impotent for life. When penises get stuck in things that cannot be removed, they have to cut splits into the penis to relieve the pressure by draining the trapped fluid. This may or may not leave the person with permanent impotence, but in this case it was pretty certain that would be the result. TLDR, don't stick your penis in things that are solid and could trap it. You may be risking impotence for life. My friend's former roommate was a firefighter. I describe him like this, and not as my friend, because he's actually a total dick, but he's still a firefighter, so he saves lives anyway. I was over at their place one day, and firefighter Dave, not his real name, comes home looking exhausted. We could smell the smoke on him, so we knew he had seen some action that day. We asked him about it, and he just got this really sad, but humored look in his eye. An Instagram model has set her apartment building on fire by filling her room with candles for some photo shoot where she would pretend to be doing yoga in the middle of hundreds of candles, but she saw a spider sitting on one of the lit candles. So she sprayed some Raid at it. The room pretty much ignited extremely quickly, and, in her fear, she threw the bottle of Raid at the fire, and then hid in her shower across the hall. She was still in the apartment when Dave kicked in the door and carried her out, her apartment engulfed in flames. She was close to passing out from smoke inhalation, so Dave had to cradle her in his arms as he carries her to the window to be lowered on a ladder. She says wait. Dave stops, thinking she is about to tell him about someone else that needs rescuing. She meekly lifts her phone and snaps a selfie, making the duck face and everything. Flames in the background. Apparently by the time he left, the Instagram model had posted the photo to her profile, and it was already getting tons of likes from what I hear, though. She did kill the spider. so technically she wasn't a total moron. I remember a story about this kid that decided it would be a fun game to go hide before bedtime and lock himself in his parents' bedroom. After his parents noticed he wasn't brushing his teeth like he should be, after putting on his pajamas they further noticed that their bedroom door was locked. After some knocking and giggling they figured out what was going on. All was okay, fun and games was now over, and it was time for bed. It was then discovered by the kid, when unlocking the door, that by some terrible odds, the key had jammed itself into the keyway and wouldn't turn to unlock. After a few seconds of struggling, panic set in, and the waterworks came point. The parents also couldn't open the door despite their best efforts, even going as far as disassembling the lock as much as possible from the hallway. Eventually, after much frustration, the father, who was an off-duty firefighter, had to drive all the way into the station on his day off to borrow the hand-pumped hydraulic door popper. Eventually he got back and managed to force the door open without too much damage to it or the frame. He saved the day once again, all on his day off. The problem was eventually discovered to be that the kid used some random key he found that wasn't even meant for the type of lock on the door. So how he managed to lock it with little to no effort is still a complete mystery to this very day. Point. My family often reminds me of this story. Sorry again, Dad. Once got called out to a fully involved 2-story residential structure fire. The fire had probably had time to consume the building for an hour or two before anyone noticed. Residents weren't home, no nearby neighbors. The place was so hot, you could feel your skin starting to crisp up underneath your turnout gear 30 feet away. Obvious surround and drown operation. No way were we saving any part of this building. Homie Arwana comes up to me screaming and crying while I'm on the nozzle that we have to go inside to save her 4 dogs. I didn't know how to tell her that if I couldn't get close to the house in fireproof pants, there was not a snowball's chance her dogs trapped inside were still alive. All told, it took about 7 hours to put the fire out and another 2 to finish overhaul and packing up our gear. The entire building was gone, nothing but a few burnt out support beams left. Comes out later that she was illegally renting the place out like a tenement house to a bunch of day laborers and their families, and had gotten someone to do unlicensed electrical work inside, which started the fire. It's a wonder no humans were hurt, but I think about that fire and that woman's total disregard for safety or the well-being of her tenants a lot. Spend a few bucks and hire a licensed union electrician. People. Multiple families lost everything they owned that day because some cheap ass landlord took shortcuts where she shouldn't have. Bonus story. Once rescued a fully grown woman who had somehow managed to wedge herself under a school bus seat and couldn't get out. Had to cut the whole seat off with a sawzall. Bus driver was none too pleased. Ah yes, my time to shine has arrived. Do take note, I'm not exactly a firefighter, but someone who had to be saved by a small group. Back in high school, I was chatting with a classmate in the recess time by the gates of the cafeteria. Thing is, I like to move my hands around or fiddle around with anything in hand's reach, and the nearest thing at the moment was the lock of the gate, which had a ringed mechanism to keep it locked once it was connected to the other side. Whilst I was talking with my mate, I was pushing and pulling my pinky finger time after time until all of a sudden, it got stuck. I tried to yank it out as I was maintaining a poker face and still talking with my partner to no avail. My finger was now swollen and escape was impossible. The bell rang signaling the end of the recess and everyone was already making their way inside their classes. Nad, my mate, was asking me to follow, which then I had to break the silly news of me being trapped. He immediately called the cafeteria lady and left me to her care, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing in front of her eyes. She called in some of the janitors and the principal, and they were in awe of such a predicament. I have to say, even some other students managed to get some pictures, and they spread it around the school like wildfire. As I was mildly recognized for my antics back to my finger, they tried to get me free with soap, butter, grease, and Vaseline, but none of it could enter within the ring lock, and I was still there. It was at that moment in which the principal knew that I had faked up and had to call emergencies till I could be set free. Around 10 minutes pass until they finally arrive and see the situation, and I got to see how hard it was for them to try and hold their laughter. The best solution was for them to file and cut the lock around my finger, and that took another 15 minutes before I was, at long last, out of that situation. Cherry on the top, I was photographed, and my picture was hung on the fireman's station for 2 weeks. Not a firefighter, but one time a firefighter was called for me when I was young. I don't remember how old, older than 4, because of where we lived at the time, but younger than 6, because my brother wasn't born yet. My mom hired a teenage girl from town to come and babysit me in the summer. This girl wasn't a very good babysitter and was often doing dumb shit that would get me injured, or just generally neglecting me. She didn't really seem to get that she was being paid to babysit me and would just drag me along to whatever she'd be doing anyway. One day her friends wanted to go to the local pool. She called my mom, who I guess said it was okay, because even though my mom knew this girl was incompetent, one of her friends who was going actually was competent. Mom would have preferred her as a babysitter, but she had her own siblings to watch, and mom figured at the pool at least there would be lifeguards and responsible adults around. The pool trip actually went surprisingly well, until we were showering off after the swim. Dumb babysitter and her dumb friends. Competent friend was in the family change room getting her little siblings dressed. Decided it was smart to spin me around in the wet soapy shower until I got all dizzy. The shower at the pool was like 2 large stalls with 3 or 4 shower heads in each, and then people all showered together. So they're spinning me around in this wet soapy shower, and what do you know, I get all dizzy and end up falling flat on my face. And there is blood. Lots of blood running down the drain. So incompetent babysitter picks me up and wraps me up in a towel and brings me to the front desk of the pool, where the lifeguard takes me on her lap and another one gets ice and they hold it to my face and take a look at me and determine that I've just bit my lip and I've got a bloody nose. Well, incompetent babysitter's dad is the fire chief for the community, and she's wigging out that she's killed the little girl she's supposed to be babysitting, and she calls her dad, who is on duty. So he rolls up in the fire truck, and I remember him taking a look at my face and my eyes and saying I don't have a concussion or anything, like the lifeguards thought, just a bit lip and a bloody nose, which has already stopped bleeding. But him and the lifeguards decide that I shouldn't go home with the babysitter, and the head lifeguard / pool manager knows my mom and calls her, and I have to wait at the pool, and the firefighters leave with my babysitter, and the lifeguards gave me candy and more ice for my lip, and then my mom came and she's pissed that the babysitter left, but she's just happy that my teeth didn't get knocked out, and then after that the babysitter didn't watch me anymore. One time, my mom and I were the ones in the stupid situation. Not because either of us were stupid, but... well, I'll explain. One time my mom was showing me how thermometers worked. I think it was for a school project or something. It was about 21 years ago, when I was around 6 years old or so. Well, at some point the bottom broke and spilled a small amount of mercury onto the carpet. We didn't notice that right away, but did notice what appeared to be a small metal ball bearing buried in the carpet. We both attempted to pick it up, but mysteriously couldn't, and were extremely confused for about 45 seconds, until my mom goes, "Oh crap, we need to wash our hands a lot right now." She called 911, and soon a fire truck was at our house to investigate the extent of the spill and oversee the proper cleanup. I realize that mercury can be potentially harmful. Fortunately this wasn't organic mercury, or we would both probably be long dead by now. Edit. Whoops, I got them switched around in my head. Elemental mercury is the kind it probably actually was. Organic is the kind that will absorb into your skin and kill you. So it's not actually unreasonable to call emergency services over, but it felt silly, since it basically amounted to a few drops and they just had us wash our hands thoroughly and cover the affected section of the carpet with powdered magnesium, IIC, for a week or so. On the plus side, we did get a funny story out it. Due to one of our neighbors being an absolute dipshit. For some context, our family has always been extremely straight edge. No one smokes or does drugs, my mom doesn't drink, and my dad has, like, a couple Corona Lights on vacation, or at barbecues sometimes. So it was especially funny when a family friend, FF, who lives down the street told us about some of the rumor mongering our mutual, nosy neighbors, NN, were doing, since I guess there's nothing better to do when the fire department shows up in the middle of a slow summer. Weekday. NN1, ooh, the fire department. I wonder what they're here for. NN2, I heard it was a meth house. FF. Interjecting, what? No it's not. I know those people. Not a firefighter, but this happened to me quite recently, actually. 2 or 3ish weeks ago. I was at school in my science class with a substitute. I felt somewhat tired and sleepy that morning during P.E. So I shook it as not sleeping much and went with my day. We had a fire drill that day, and as my class was leaving I felt very drowsy and walked into a desk. Right when I got out of the room, I laid on the floor for a solid 10 seconds before getting up slowly and asking the sub to go to the nurse. He replies with the most expected sure, but after this phrase, and I reply that I need to. He shrugs it off, and I bump into a few people and then pass out on the asphalt. Now here is the funner thing. The day previously I went to fire station to fulfill a requirement for a BSA merit badge, fire safety, to be exact, where we had to get a tour of the facility. The next day, when I passed out, an ambulance was called because I was so dehydrated, and lo and behold, the people that I saw the station were the first of the medical professionals that day. I was given an fourth, and my blood pressure and sugar was taken to make sure I wasn't diabetic and all that. I had to be transported to a hospital and had to given 3 bags of fourth fluid before I could fully recover. Later that day, I had to skip school the next day, and the story spread like wildfire. The lesson? Drink water, kids. Straight from the news, police and paramedics made an early morning call to a motel to free a man whose penis was caught in a swimming pool suction fitting. A clerk at the Scottish Inn Motel in Lakeland, Florida made a 911 call at 4:45 a.m. Friday, saying the 33-year-old man was trapped in the swimming pool. The pool's pump was shut off before paramedics arrived, but the man still could not free himself because his penis had become swollen. Paramedics inserted a lubricant around the suction fitting, and authorities freed the man after about 40 minutes. The man, who had rented a room at the motel, told police he had gone swimming about 12:30 a.m. He was treated at Lakeland Regional Medical Center. The responding police officer's report stated the following: as I approached the man, I could see his pants were down to his knees and his penis was stuck in a suction hole located on the north side of the swimming pool. The police officers shut off the pool's pump, but that didn't do the trick. Robert Chuvrin's penis remained stuck. Unfortunately for him, it had become swollen by the battering it had received before the pump was turned off. Efforts by the police to free him failed, so the paramedics were summoned. Lubricant was applied around the pipe fitting in the hope that the poor man would become unstuck. Eventually, after the paramedics spent nearly an hour alternating between delicate maneuvering and strenuous pulling efforts, Chuvrin popped out of the suction pipe. The paramedics took him to a nearby hospital, and a spokesman there later announced that Chuvrin had been released after being treated for bruised genitalia. Heard a story from a first responder once. Warning, extremely graphic. I share this story because I still meet people who drive without seat belts. A lady wanted alcohol but couldn't afford any, so she goes down to the local pub. She puts on a show for the guys, does some table dancing, gets completely hammered, and gets her free booze. Gets in her cab and drives home. No seatbelt. Point being that drunk, she has no idea how fast she's going, so she hits a guardrail hard enough to flip the car. She gets partially ejected through the sunroof, her top half, and the car proceeds to land on the roof. The high speed means the calf keeps going about another 100 or 200 feet. The guy told me it was like a human eraser. You couldn't tell this was even a person by looking. All the skin and features were ground off by the pavement. She was still moaning. There was literally nothing they could do but put a sheet over her while they waited for an ambulance. There's a lot to learn from this story. Alcohol makes you do stupid and dangerous things. Driving drunk is a terrible idea under any circumstance. But, most importantly, if you want to avoid a potentially agonizing and horridly gruesome death, wear your freaking seatbelt. Oh man, I had to make an account for this. I'm not a firefighter, but I know I made this story for a couple of them. The summer before 8th grade, my friends and I were hanging out at a park and I decided to get in a baby swing. Why? What was I thinking? I don't have baby legs. The logistics don't compute, but in my adolescent brain I paid it no mind. So here I'm in a baby swing and I realize that my leg kinda feels tingly, so I try to pull myself out, to no avail. Then I ask my friends to lift me out, again to no avail, and this time I sunk in deeper into the swing. So now I start panicking. Stuck like a fat kid in a tunnel slide, and panicking like rat caught by a snake. My friend called 911. This is how the phone call went. My friend: "Hi, can you send someone to come help my friend? He's stuck in a baby swing at the park." Operator: "What? A baby swing? Is this a prank call? What?" My friend: "No, he's actually stuck. He can't really feel his leg anymore." Operator: "Oh, okay. We'll dispatch a unit to your location." So the firefighters get there and they're amused, for apparent reasons, and after cracking some jokes they bent the swing back and lift me up like Rafiki did to Simba. They left and my friends made fun of me as they shouldered. Then we walked to McDonald's for some ice cream. I think. TLDR, stuck in baby swing, called 911. Firefighters are my hero. Not a firefighter, but an ocean lifeguard, beach patrol, who worked through the FD. We were having crazy rip currents all week due to a low pressure system that was offshore. 8 to 12 foot surf most days. Red flags were up, news was blasting warnings, but every week new tourists would come and have to be rescued. So the normal check-in day for the tourists is on Sunday. They arrive, settle in, and Sundays are usually quiet. On Monday we got a call to head to a swimmer in distress. I'm first on scene, get into the water, and get to this guy and his 2 young teen daughters. Our protocol with multiple people like that who were awake and responsive is to wait for our jet boat to deploy from the beach, and the boat brings everyone in. Get them in, no problem. Give them stern warnings not to go back in the water, because it is so dangerous at the time. The following Wednesday, I guess they took Tuesday off, we got another call for the same location. Another guard was first on scene, and had him back on shore before the boat arrived. The victim was the same guy, but at least he made his family stay on the beach. We gave him another warning. The next day I was on the beach for my day off, just hanging out with friends. I saw the beach patrol mule heading for us with its lights on, so I jumped on in case any help was needed. We got to the same location, and, of course, it was the same guy. This was the 3rd time we had to pull this dumbass out of the water. I wasn't involved on the call, so I walked over to the captain and made sure that he knew this was the same idiot. Captain spoke to one of the cops that responded to the call, and once the guy was cleared from us the cop cuffed him. Wanted to put a little fear into him, endangering public workers. He of course released him with a solid promise: "If we come back, you're going to jail." The guy was either stubborn or stupid, but he was also lucky, because on Friday he went back into the water again, but this time with a cheapo life jacket. He got in trouble, but managed to get himself out before anyone called 911 again. And we know this because another guard patrolled past him just as he was stumbling out of the water, coughing up water from his lungs. But we have to save people regardless of if they are stupid or not. Now's my time to shine, baby. Lol, I wasn't the firefighter, I was the person being saved. July 4th, Shaboy decides to get a little drunk, and I happen to have about $1,000 worth of fireworks. I had mortars, Roman candles, bottle rockets, artillery, and lastly cakes. For some reason I thought it'd be cool to shoot off fireworks from my floor, 3rd floor of a 3-flat building. My friends were smart enough, still dumb, to aim fireworks away from the buildings to the sky. I happened to grab the rocket mid-spark and aim downwards when I saw sparkly lights. The rocket blasts straight to my neighbor's doghouse and blows it to pieces. It felt like I was in 2008 Iraq. I was excited and scared at the same time, since I'm a fiend when it comes to blowing stuff up. After coming a little to my senses, my buddies and I rushed to a now inflamed doghouse which is spreading quickly. We don't own fire extinguisher, so we just grabbed my blankets to attempt to put off. I know fire blankets exists, but what I didn't know is that they are a special type of blanket. I thought fire blankets meant any type of blanket used to put out a fire. So here we are using my Guatemalan sewn tiger blankets to put off this fire which is spreading all over my neighbor's garden. We are trapped within the garden screaming. I didn't get the danger of this totally, since I didn't see myself dying, so I thought it was a slide game. Fortunately we have neighbors all around us. I live in Chicago where apartments are pretty close to each other, and they had called firefighters pretty early. Now imagine me laughing and screaming out of enjoyment of being in a cool, but hot, circular fire while my two buddies are freaking out. Firefighters come and put out fire pretty quickly. I was just laughing the whole time and felt like I was one with the rocket. All this happened within about 4-ish minutes. We got burned, but not too bad. Got evicted within a couple days and paid for neighbors' damages. I never will get drunk again, but yeah, that's my horrible dumb son of a beach story. For those that doubt, I can attach my eviction letter and show burns we all got. I also have remnants of my burnt blanket. It's super small, but you can still see the tiger head of it at it. Meanwhile all the other fireworks in the roof, sack of Roman candles and smaller cakes are going off that my friends didn't stop prior me grabbing rockets. Those were aimed upward and no damages took place. Kind long. So, if you want the summary, start at the second paragraph. Don't know if this applies, but once went on a call for a man with unknown trauma to his lower body. When we arrived, there was a man laying on the couch of his ex-wife *s house, and his pants were ripped and caked in blood. We tried to get the ex-wife to tell us what happened, but all she kept saying was, "I woke up this morning and found him here laying on my couch." In my mind I was a little skeptic, since it seemed like the two hated each other, but I ignored it and continued to examine the man. He reeked of alcohol and seems very discombobulated, probably due to the large amount of blood he lost. We asked him what happened, but he didn't know either. So we asked him to remove his pants, and sure enough his underwear was soaked in blood as well. We cut off his underwear, and to our astonishment this man's ballsack was cut open in an almost surgical fashion. And the best part was that both of his testicles were hanging outside of his scrotum. Ironically, due to how inebriated this man was, he didn't bleed to death because the alcohol had slowed his heart rate. Long story short, this man had gotten so drunk that he somehow ended up at his ex-wife's house, and when he couldn't get in the front door he decided to climb a fence in the backyard, which had sharp exposed points on the top of it, and when he jumped to the ground, let's just say not all of him made it down. And that's the time I had to hold another man's scrotum together because he was being a dummy. Obligatory, not a firefighter, but my house burned down in 1996. When it was burning, I was in the Boy Scouts. I had gone through fire drills, what to do in a fire, stuff hosted by the fire department, all that fire safety stuff. When I saw there was a fire on my porch, I immediately ran through the house, screaming for everyone to immediately get out of the house as fast as possible. I got my sister and brother out, and I called 911. I told them there was a fire. They connected me to the fire department. I gave my address and said, "I need to leave the house now, thanks." And my mother looked at the phone and picked it up. I remember yelling at her to leave, and she just nods to her 12-year-old son, and I rush out of the house. I ran to the outside to see that it wasn't the porch on fire. The entire garage was in flames. I later learned that the fire was in excess of 2000 degrees F. Because that's the heat the firemen's equipment began to melt at. It was hotter, but their meters only went up to 3.6 Roentgen 2000 F. Despite all of this, my mother took almost 20 minutes to exit the house, as she was explaining what was happening to the dispatcher, giving all her information. etc. It wasn't until about 15 minutes into the conversation that the dispatcher asked, "Ma'am, are you still inside the house?" Her response, "Well, yes, it's just the porch that's on fire." The dispatcher then told her to leave the house as soon as possible. My mother then got her shoes on. I ran out without my shoes, or socks, or anything, and even picked up the sweater she was painting at the time. She painted patterns on shirts as a hobby, and casually walked out of the house. A lack of urgency was astounding. Turns out bad wiring caught fire in the attic, and the entire roof of the house was burning for hours before we saw the first licks of fire drop down onto the porch. My first year as a firefighter, fresh out of fire academy. My friends and I had all just gotten off work and were heading to a party in a nearby town. This road is a curvy 2-lane highway and it's around 9 PM in the summer, so it's just about dark. All 4 of us in the vehicle were volunteer fire at the time. We come around a corner about halfway to our party and there's a man directing traffic in the middle of the road with just road flares. Pull up to ask what is wrong, as we can assist, until the neighboring department arrives. Mind you, our home department and Thiz are the same distance from this accident, but it was technically their county. They had no sleepers, so this accident just happened shortly before we had arrived. This person had been traveling northbound on the S-curves and successfully ended up in a field on the southbound side of the highway without hitting a single other vehicles. When we get up to the patient, they are screaming bloody murder about losing their children and going back to jail. I don't want to go back to jail, but they were too drunk to remove their own seatbelt. Thankfully they didn't, as they had a spinal injury. It was about 15 minutes for the fire department to arrive. They promptly C-collared, life-flighted and taken to a hospital in the area. If I remember correctly, their back was about .20 and they were taken to jail shortly after treatment. Should have thought about losing your children before you decided to drive drunk. Not a firefighter, but they were involved. We lived in a 10-story apartment building on the top floor. Usually in my home country you have the options of either putting bars on your windows or putting netting to keep your kids from going splat. My dad, penny pincher extraordinaire, decided to just put screws in the windowsill so that you could only open the windows so far. The problem is that he miscalculated my brother's head and brain size at 6'0". One day me, little brother, my aunt and our maid are waiting for my mom to get home from work when the intercom rings. At the same time we hear sirens. Our maid answers the intercom and someone says there is a kid halfway out the window up there. You need to go in, but do not startle him or he will fall out. She goes in there and my brother is literally halfway out. Is he panicking? No, he's waving at the crowd that has formed downstairs. The maid managed to get him back in safely and my mom got the scare of her life coming home to emergency services and talking to mostly. I remember my dad coming over that weekend to move the screws and my brother getting upset I can barely fit my hand out now and my mom biting back good. I've had anxiety from birth, so the dumbest thing I did was trying to iron my underwear when I was 15 mo old and burnt my belly button. My brother, however, had multiple incidents of dumbass, including the time he went snowboarding without a helmet on, went headfirst onto a tree trunk, finished snowboarding because he didn't want to miss out on his day pass, drove back down, then decided to ask my mom to drive him to the ER as he had a nasty headache 12 hours later. In all my years as a firefighter I have learned there is no rescuing people from themselves. Couple quick ones for you. Had a young couple call for a medical problem. Upon arrival we found out these 2 Darwin winners got frisky while she was on her period. No judgment there. The problem was that they forgot to take out the tampon and proceeded to pack it in like they were loading a cannon so much that she couldn't get it out. This occurred minutes before they called and their only concern was toxic shock syndrome, which takes much longer to occur, and they adamantly refused to be taken to the hospital, which was a recommendation to get it removed. Next up is the animals who needed to be saved. One old lady called us for an owl stuck in a tree. I don't know how to make that any more clear or make sense of it better than that. This shit show became such a big deal that the resident called the chief of the district and we were ordered from on high to remove an owl from a tree. I have no more words on the matter. Another old lady, there may be a common theme here, called for a cat stuck in a tree. Slightly more common. Dispatch tried to assure her that it got up there, it can get down, but she insisted nonetheless and stated that it sounded injured and looked sick. Fair enough, I like animals, I'll go with an open mind. Upon arrival she directs us to this very not tall tree with a faking bobcat, I assume cursing at her in bobcat tongue and very not happy about being bothered. We did some public education on wildlife that day. I got plenty more, but this thread seems to be full of good stories. Enjoy. Not a firefighter, and in fact, a couple of the dummies here are, well, dummies isn't fair, they were kinda drunk. Our town is pretty small and has a volunteer fire crew. So my dad and my brother are at the pub watching the football, soccer. My brother, about 12, goes to get food and continues to watch the game through the window, with my dad looking up now and then to check on him. Engrossed in the game with his buddies, it takes him a few minutes to take in the details behind my brother. The craft and framing shop opposite the pub is on fire. He goes outside and calls my brother in. As my brother walks into the pub, his spot by the window is showered in glass as the windows of the shop blow. Game now forgotten, the whole pub is now watching fire through the window. My dad turns to his buddy Tim, a volunteer firefighter, and says, "Shouldn't we call someone?" "Yeah," says Tim. "You should call." "Oh see, that's me." And he thrusts his pint at my dad and runs out the back door, approximate 300 yards from the fire station, followed by several similarly tipsy colleagues. The pub continues to watch the fire, as though the window is a TV. My brother, unharmed and unfazed, continues to eat his chips. The volunteer fire captain comes out of the men's room, sees the fire and comments on its growing nastiness. My dad side-eyes him. "Shouldn't you be somewhere, Al?" Al looks blank for a moment, before proclaiming, "Oh shit," and running out the back door after his crew. The trucks from the two neighboring towns beat them to the scene mere yards from their door. Some smarters painted "Oh shit" on the bottom of the sign, where their motto should be "Faulty electrics in the shop" had caused sparking which had hit a bin full of spirit-soaked rags, and in a building full of fabrics, wood and various solvents. The fire escalated quickly. The owners had good insurance and no one was hurt. Whether it's because dispatchers don't really understand what we are looking for, or because they sometimes just don't have enough information, we got a run that just said we were responding to a kid hit by a car. Whenever we see the word smoke or child, we rip out of the station. Just balls to the wall, pedal to the metal, screaming at dispatch for more information, because fighting fires and saving kids' lives is what we all signed up for. Usually our neighborhood traffic isn't as bad as the rest of Manhattan, but turning the corner to the accident site was particularly difficult, and almost certainly, because the accident seemed to be taking up most of the road up ahead. The lieutenant that day is also a registered nurse and sometimes a little impatient, so he just hopped out and started walking up, while the chauffeur kept laying on the horn to try to get all the cars and buses out of the way. I hopped out and followed the boss simply in case I needed to stabilize or apply pressure on a wound or something. It's so far away that all we can see is a circle of people. We finally get there and tell everyone to give us some space, and there's this teenager splayed out almost comedically, like, laying on his back, arms straight out, one leg bent and tucked under the other, staring off into space over his right shoulder, but no blood, no visible wounds, not even a car. So we ask what the problem is, and he says he can't move his legs. I guess the boss sees teenagers do this kind of thing all the time, because he is frowning and just goes, "No, you're fine." I'm shocked because the kid could be paralyzed. Sure, some trauma doesn't manifest physically, but the boss reaches down and pulls each leg and asks if he can feel it. Kid says he can, and the boss rolls his eyes and just walks away. One of his friends was videotaping and asked us, "This has gotta be worth at least $1,000, right?" And I don't think I managed to not say absolutely not right to his face. Turns out the kid got clipped and by a side view mirror and thought lying on the ground would get him a payout. As far as we could tell, the EMTs took him to the hospital, so his bill might actually lose him a bunch of money. I was a Navy corpsman, so this one is probably a bit of a reach, but whatevs. Marine comes to sick call with a seriously beaten up dick. Like, lacerations, bruising. Thing was really faked up. Asked him what he did, and he insisted that what happened was that he had a surprise boner and it hit his zipped up pants zipper and basically went all garbage disposal on his junk. Dude would not drop this narrative, no matter how many times we told him that this just doesn't happen. Finally, Doc, the actual MD, comes in and tells him enough of this shit, yada yada, write him up for malingering. Need the full story. Dude jammed his wiener into the back of a computer tower. According to him, there was an opening back there, probably because old PC towers in the Navy routinely had sheets swapped out, and they didn't always cover openings when things were removed. So, because he was a faking donkey, he stuck his finger in it and felt a light tingling sensation as his skin made contact with something electrical. So he took the next logical step and whipped out his dick and shoved it into the back of this computer. What he did not account for was that the opening had sharp metal edges. But once inside, he got that tingling feeling, and so he felt like he might as well finish the job before he pulled out. Plus, and this is where I had to stop myself from laughing, he felt it was smarter to pull himself out flaccid rather than hard. Taps forehead. This was not a young man. This was not a man without rank. 2. I can recall one specific. The specific one was a young girl around teenage years who decided those toddler swings with the seat you stick their legs through like a little basket so they can't fall out was made for a teenage girl. She got stuck and lost blood flow to her legs. We had to cut her down and get her to a hospital to have it safely removed due to it basically becoming a tourniquet on both her legs. The other is general, but it's people who didn't wear a seatbelt and the people they killed as a result. You have less control of a vehicle when you're not being held in place, so those wrecks are more common as the first sign of trouble. Your butt moves in the seat and reduces your ability to control the vehicle. You also become a projectile. If you're lucky you only kill yourself. If you're not you wind up bouncing around and killing a passenger. Also the leading cause of partial ejections and re-entry to vehicles, since nothing was holding them to the seats. So many times I could have just been there cutting someone out of a seat and them being barely beat up, but instead they had been scalped and died or hit their kid or spouse or other family member or friend and killed them. One in particular I remember was a large man not wearing a seatbelt in an overturned truck. He woke up while we were working on him cutting the passenger side up to get down to him as the vehicle was on its side, driver side down. He kept asking us how his son was. At first we didn't get it. Then we realized he was laying on his 15 to 16-year-old son, and due to the man's size we didn't see him. The son was wearing a seatbelt, but he died because his father smashed into him and smothered him to death while we worked, rather than just wear a seatbelt extender so his seatbelt fit. Point also, don't lie to us about if you wore it. Your seatbelt won't fire the pretensioners if they are not engaged in the slot. They are designed that way. There is a circuit that is completed by the best being clicked in place, which is also how your car knows your passengers are wearing a seatbelt or not and sets off that obnoxious alarm. There is also a sensor in the passenger front seat of most modern vehicles to detect the weight of a small person, which is why your sodas or pizzas it whatever set off the alarm. Just wear the damn seatbelt and don't lie. If you were wearing it, I won't be able to pull tons of slack on it when I arrive. Guess what goes in the report as the determining factor your insurance sees as to if you should have your medical covered as a result of an accident? Yup. I don't know what they do with their information, but I have to write it in the report. Point source: State Vehicle Rescue Technician and Firefighter, mostly volunteer at this point. This is only kinda fulfilling what the question asks, and it's also my dad's story, not mine, but I still have to share because it's kinda crazy, and I honestly don't know if this all really happened because it was a trip. Point: the person involved happened to be one of my brother's Facebook friends. They went to the same high school at this time, so understandable. The kid, who we can call A, is about 18 at the time. So for whatever reason, he stole a fire truck. Like, the whole fire truck. Just for fun. Point: I think his dad might have been on the department, so it kinda got swept under the rug since no one was harmed. Details are fuzzy. I was still in middle school when this was happening, and it wasn't very interesting until the next part. Point: my mom is checking my brother's Facebook. Very weird. She still does this for both of us, even though we are 17 and 19 respectively, just to see if he's missed any notifications, and sees that A came out as gay on Facebook. I think she asked my brother about it out of curiosity, and he said, I mean, he's acting like this is a surprise. I didn't know the kid, but it must have been obvious. Later deletes the post, despite getting mostly positive comments, which was kinda surprising considering the time and place we lived in, and claims he was hacked by a friend, and it was a joke. Point: for whatever reason, he ran away from home after that. There was speculation his parents were homophobic and kicked him out, and he tried to backtrack, or he was scared, or he was just going crazy. I can't confirm or deny any of this. But what I can confirm is that stealing fire trucks is not a healthy coping mechanism. Point: I guess this is where I start to answer the actual question. Point: So A is on his way, and somehow he finds himself back at the fire station, and somehow finds his way into another fire truck. Where the hell do they keep the keys for fire trucks anyways? I'll have to ask my dad tomorrow, but it must not be a good hiding spot if this kid got in twice in a year. Then again, who expects someone to steal a fire truck? I don't even know what happens next, but somehow he crashes a damn thing. He had to have been drunk or something, because he had absolutely no injuries. My dad has to go, because it was his department's truck, and apparently he pissed himself when he got caught. Like bad. My dad was angry about the truck, but the pants peeing thing made him laugh so hard he couldn't help but tell me, who was probably 13 at the time, LMAO. This probably wasn't the story you were looking for, and I'm not sure how accurate the details are this far, because I haven't actually ever told this story. I ended up going to prison for a bit, and after talking to my mom I found out he's out now. I might go Facebook stalk him or something, just to see what he's up to now. I actually have two where the firefighters/Ms were the ones. Let's call it giving bad advice. Both situations were in the same small town. I think totally volunteer crews, but happened on two separate occasions. I absolutely support Ms, but I guess sometimes, when things get crazy, we all make mistakes. Anyway, one time our basement was flooding, which wasn't uncommon, but for some reason this time it was coming in far too fast for our sump pump to keep up, so my parents called the fire department. They could pump us, but had to access through a particular window. I don't know why, and apparently when my mom suggested that she swim from the door to the window, whole length of the basement, they were like okay, and let her. The water was already 4 inches below the fuse box and the basement was full of electrical equipment, hot water heater, furnace, fuse box. I think about it now, and think, why didn't they just break the window? To be fair, it's quite possible that my dad put up a fuss at a broken window. Also happened at our house. Kid had a car accident in front, snapping a utility pole and pushing it about 6 feet closer to the house than it used to be. Miraculously he walked away relatively unhurt. Needless to say, the electrical wires came down too. Not broken, as far as I know, but all down in the driveway. When my family returned from shopping to find this scene happening, of course the Ms, can't recall which units were at the location, tried to direct us another way. When we explained that we lived at that address, they made us wait for a few minutes, then told us they didn't know if the utility company cut the power yet, but if we wanted to go home, we could drive fast over the power lines. Again, to assign appropriate stupidity, my mother decided to take them up on this suggestion and did so. I realize the likelihood of getting electrocuted was slim, but seriously, if you're waiting around to make sure the power gets shut off before finishing the scene up, don't advise the public to just drive fast through it. Not a firefighter, but 20 years back I was working as raft guide and doctor, and I'm a certified swift water rescue. A little context. In Dominican Republic there are no poisonous snakes. This is important later. And we are rafting down a class 4th technical river. Not a really though one, but it's through a tight vertical canyon with lots of drops. Anyhow, I'm taking down the river a group of German tourists, and one of the lads is hyper faking active and trying to impress a bunch of girls by saying how I'll and tame the river. We are at etc. Since I hear this type of shit once in a while, I don't pay much attention. Anyhow, halfway down the river we stop for a break. It's a small beach with vertical canyon walls. The German decides to show his prowess in rock climbing and starts climbing the canyon wall. I tell him not to do it, since he doesn't have proper equipment, no harness, no rope. He dismisses me and says he has done this many times. He grabs a ledge with both hands and pulls himself up. The moment he clears his head, at this point he is about 2 meters high from the ground, he encounters a snake. The animal is shocked, strikes and bites his forehead, and Hans fell backwards to sand beach. Now he is bleeding on his forehead, and shouting and screaming. Then he starts to plead me to suck his head. I'm like, what the fuck, dude? Don't worry, there is no poisonous snake in the island. But he is insistent, and I told him either shut up, or he is not going back into raft. We got a complaint letter from him couple of weeks later saying the guide refused to give first aid to him. Not dumb so much on the patient side of things, but 2011/2012, at a base in Texas with the USAF point. We are all just hanging around the firehouse, not much going on. Then the tones drop. Engine 4, Rescue 9, respond, building XXX, for a female having possibly diarrhea. We stop dead, like always when the tones drop, but we don't start moving when it ends. Instead we all look at each other like what the fuck, and wait for them to be repeated. They repeated the call, and we run to the trucks. We get there, knock on her dorm room door, and call out fire department, and she calls out in here. So we go in, and just looking around the bedroom, like you do when you walk into anywhere, you can tell she must not have been feeling good for a while, as there's a few pairs of panties where she didn't quite make it. Point, we get to the bathroom, and let's just say there was nothing possible about this poor girl's diarrhea. It was like Mount St. Helens in there. So we all look at our crew chief, who's actually a paramedic on the civilian side as well, like, okay boss man, what the fuck do we do now? Because seriously, what the fuck do we do now? We don't have an ambulance. We have to wait for one from off base. Yes, another stupidest decision. He has the 2 younger airmen with us go down and wait for the ambulance to show up as we try and comfort this poor girl. I say girl because she was all of 20-ish. We do an assessment and she's quite weak. Tells us she'd basically been pupping for most of the day before she called us. Now this is where the dumbest part comes in. We relay all of this to dispatch, and our dispatch isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but they have checklists to follow, so it's fine. Copy that. Rescue. Do you need the base photographer to come to the scene? The girl looks at us horrified. I mean, she's already sheeting her guts out in front of a bunch of male firefighters, and now they're asking about a photographer. Our crew chief quickly shuts him down. Ambulance arrives and gets her hooked up to 4th and transports her, and we head back to the station. Crew chief charges into dispatch and tells the guy that if he ever pulls some shit like that again, he's going to have bigger problems than he already does. Dispatch was at ESGT, who was in the process of getting kicked out of the USAF for either medical issues or failing a part test or something, or both. Running joke around the station for the next few days was someone should show up to the girl's room and ask her out, as she was quite attractive. Just don't forget the bottle of Imodium. Yes. We're awful people. Not a firefighter, but a train crew. Point, power goes out, so the train is stuck. Can't move. We are stuck about 300 feet from a station, so we get permission, after about 20 minutes, to walk people off. Point, well, about 10 minutes in, one customer got irate and decided to self-evac. He climbs out of the train. I see him, and I tell him not to do that. He says fuck you. 8. Litty. I said, can you at least jump off on the other side? He looks at me like I'm crazy. I just let my command center know, because I'm not doing the most to get this man back inside. Point, most people don't realize how high up the train is. You might board from the platform and think it is small, but there are about 2 to 3 feet of height, and he just jumps off of it. And the track below is graded with 2-foot dip, and there is almost zero visibility. I got a flashlight, breaks his leg or his ankle, but now he's just screaming. And he's on the express track. Lucky for us, still no power. So I said, I told you not to do that shit, and now I climb down the train the right way and make use of the ladder, and he's like, I just did something really stupid. Yup. If you had gone to the right where the wall is instead of the left, you might have just had a scratch, but you just fell into the abyss. What would have been a 10-minute evac turns into 2 hours. Cause he can't walk, much less climb, so when power returns, it has to just stay off in that area, meaning no express service, and EMS has to be taxied to the area. Former FF/paramedic, I had a patient who called around 3 AM every shift. We refer to people who do this as frequent flyers. She was in her mid-40s, had a trach tube, and was morbidly obese. She would hyperventilate and insist she was having trouble breathing despite being measurably and clinically fine. She demanded transportation to the hospital every time. Who am I to refuse? She had 2 daughters. One, I affectionately referred to as Colossus. For those who don't know, FFS/EMTs are notified of emergencies by a tone system. When you're in the station, the tones drop and the dispatcher sends units to whatever emergency point anyway. It was about 4 AM when the tones went off. and the dispatcher droned instructions for medic ## to respond to address. For difficulty breathing. This fat bitch was faking another breathing episode and all acting like she couldn't walk, so we literally had to carry her 400 plus lb. Limp body about 10 feet to get to our stretcher. Colossus asked if she could ride along. I said sure. The other daughter decided to drive separately. We put Big Mama in the back of the truck. Colossus got in the front seat. I waited for her to close the door. I was tired, so it took me a while to realize that she couldn't shut the door because she was too fat and her arms were too short. I got out, went to her side and shut the door. The whole thing reminded me of a cartoon. When we got to the hospital, I exited the ambulance and went to the rear to help my partner unload our patient and take her into the addition. Shortly after transferring care to the facility, the daughter that drove showed up with steak and shake. Smelled like burgers and fries. Just what the doctor ordered. I thought. My partner stayed inside to finish up the report and I took the stretcher to the ambulance. When I got through the double doors, I saw the squad shaking and Colossus frantically trying to escape the passenger side. We had forgotten her in the truck and she wasn't able to reach the handle because it was covered by her fat. Not the dumbest person or situation, but one I think about often. 10 AM on a Tuesday, drunk guy and his significant other, drunk lady, hit the ditch. No damage to the vehicle, truck is in some muck against a fence, so it's stuck in the ditch. Someone saw it and called police. Police show up and drunk couple say, can't get out, we are pinned, maybe hoping they could sober up after the 40 of rye. Police call us, and as we arrive, drunk lady gets free and gets loaded onto the stretcher with a C-collar on. She thinks she is being restrained and tells the paramedics she didn't do anything wrong and wasn't driving, so she can be drunk. Paramedic says yes ma'am, but we still need to take you to the ambulance to get checked out. Boom. Haymaker to the medic's jaw. Well, yeah, done faked up Aaron. So instead of folding the medical tape by half when securing her head, normally we fold it in half so it won't stick to your eyebrows. They went out of their way to fully catch both eyebrows. Meanwhile, drunk dude still complaining he is stuck. Captain says, well, if you're stuck I guess we will just cut off your door and help get you out. Police officer is waiting at the passenger door and watches as this drunk dude starts tossing partially empty bottles of whiskey out the passenger side, landing at the cop's feet. Those aren't mine, they were in the ditch. Smooth. Anyways, we bring over the jaws, hydraulic spreaders for removing doors on vehicles. One touch to the door and drunk guy loses it. What the F? You can't effing do that to my truck, etc. Captain replies with, sir, if you're stuck we have to get you out so the medics can make sure you're not injured. Well if you're gonna cut apart my truck. He then threw a 9-inch hunting knife out the passenger door, hit the cop with it. Yeah, doing terrific bud, and swung open the door. I wiggled out. I think I'm fine. I just need a ride home. I shouldn't drive. Don't tell that cop. But I've had a drink with breakfast. 2 I can recall. One specific. The specific one was a young girl around teenage years who decided those toddler swings with the seat you stick their legs through like a little basket so they can't fall out was made for a teenage girl. She got stuck and lost blood flow to her legs. We had to cut her down and get her to a hospital to have it safely removed due to it basically becoming a tourniquet on both her legs. The other is general, but it's people who didn't wear a seatbelt and the people they killed as a result. You have less control of a vehicle when you're not being held in place, so those wrecks are more common as the first sign of trouble. Your butt moves in the seat and reduces your ability to control the vehicle. You also become a projectile. If you're lucky you only kill yourself. If you're not you wind up bouncing around and killing a passenger. Also the leading cause of partial ejections and re-entry to vehicles, since nothing was holding them to the seats. So many times I could have just been there cutting someone out of a seat and them being barely beat up, but instead they had been scalped and died or hit their kid or spouse or other family member or friend and killed them. One in particular I remember was a large man not wearing a seat belt in an overturned truck. He woke up while we were working on him cutting the passenger side up to get down to him as the vehicle was on its side, driver side down. He kept asking us how his son was. At first we didn't get it. Then we realized he was laying on his 15 to 16 year old son, and due to the man's size we didn't see him. The son was wearing a seatbelt, but he died because his father smashed into him and smothered him to death while we worked, rather than just wear a seatbelt extender so his seatbelt fit. Point also, don't lie to us about if you wore it. Your seatbelt won't fire the pretensioners if they are not engaged in the slot. They are designed that way. There is a circuit that is completed by the best being clicked in place, which is also how your car knows your passengers are wearing a seatbelt or not and sets off that obnoxious alarm. There is also a sensor in the passenger front seat of most modern vehicles to detect the weight of a small person, which is why your sodas or pizzas, it whatever, set off the alarm. Just wear the damn seatbelt and don't lie. If you were wearing it, I won't be able to pull tons of slack on it when I arrive. Guess what goes in the report as the determining factor your insurance sees as to if you should have your medical covered as a result of an accident? Yup. I don't know what they do with their information, but I have to write it in the report. Point source: State Vehicle Rescue Technician and Firefighter, mostly volunteer at this point. I was a Navy corpsman, so this one is probably a bit of a reach, but whatevs. Marine comes to sick call with a seriously beaten up dick. Like lacerations, bruising. Thing was really faked up. Point asked him what he did, and he insisted that what happened was that he had a surprise boner and it hit his zipped up pants zipper and basically went all garbage disposal on his junk. Dude would not drop this narrative, no matter how many times we told him that this just doesn't happen. Finally, Doc, the actual MD, comes in and tells him enough of this shit, yada yada, write him up for malingering. Need the full story. Point: dude jammed his wiener into the back of a computer tower. According to him, there was an opening back there, probably because old PC towers in the Navy routinely had sheets swapped out, and they didn't always cover openings when things were removed. So, because he was a faking donkey, he stuck his finger in it and felt a light tingling sensation as his skin made contact with something electrical. So he took the next logical step and whipped out his dick and shoved it into the back of this computer. What he did not account for was that the opening had sharp metal edges. But once inside, he got that tingling feeling, and so he felt like he might as well finish the job before he pulled out. Plus, and this is where I had to stop myself from laughing, he felt it was smarter to pull himself out flaccid rather than hard. Taps forehead. This was not a young man. This was not a man without rank. I was a Navy corpsman, so this one is probably a bit of a reach, but whatevs. Marine comes to sick call with a seriously beaten up dick. Like lacerations, bruising. Thing was really faked up. Point asked him what he did, and he insisted that what happened was that he had a surprise boner and it hit his zipped up pants zipper and basically went all garbage disposal on his junk. Dude would not drop this narrative, no matter how many times we told him that this just doesn't happen. Finally, Doc, the actual MD, comes in and tells him enough of this shit, yada yada, write him up for malingering. Need the full story. Point: dude jammed his wiener into the back of a computer tower. According to him, there was an opening back there, probably because old PC towers in the Navy routinely had sheets swapped out, and they didn't always cover openings when things were removed. So, because he was a faking donkey, he stuck his finger in it and felt a light tingling sensation as his skin made contact with something electrical. So he took the next logical step and whipped out his dick and shoved it into the back of this computer. What he did not account for was that the opening had sharp metal edges. But once inside, he got that tingling feeling, and so he felt like he might as well finish the job before he pulled out. Plus, and this is where I had to stop myself from laughing, he felt it was smarter to pull himself out flaccid rather than hard. Taps forehead. This was not a young man. This was not a man without rank.